Hello, this is Shankar from System-Based Labs. I worked across regulated environments including NBCS National Biomedical Computer System, CDIS Component Distribution Information System with the American Red Cross, CTMS Clinical Trial Management Systems at Genentech, and medical imaging platforms. Let's talk about how to validate a machine learning model used in clinical imaging. Let's start simple. When we validate a machine learning model, most people think in steps. First, we define the validation objectives, what exactly the model is supposed to do, aligned with clinical use and regulatory expectations. Next, we verify the dataset, checking source traceability, labeling accuracy, and whether the data represents real-world scenarios. Then we establish performance criteria, metrics like sensitivity, specificity, and ROC/AUC based on clinical relevance. After that, we validate the model using independent datasets to ensure it generalizes well and is not overfitted. And finally, we validate integration within the clinical workflow, making sure it performs reliably in real-world use. All of this is done under regulatory expectations from bodies like the US Food and Drug Administration and frameworks such as Good Clinical Practice. This is the standard view. Simple, structured, sequential. But now let's go one level deeper. Most approaches treat documentation as the final step. You define, you test, and then you document. But in real regulated environments, that approach does not work. Because if you document at the end, you are reconstructing what happened. You lose traceability, you introduce inconsistencies, and you risk audit findings. So I don't see documentation as a final step. I see it as a continuous layer, a column, not a row. Every activity must be documented as it happens. When you define acceptance criteria, when you validate datasets, when you execute tests, when you validate workflow integration, documentation is not something you do later. It is part of the validation itself. If you delay documentation, you will go back and forth on approved test plans, and that is a red flag in any regulated system. Now let's go further. Validation is not linear. It is continuous. You don't define first, then test, then document. Instead, you operate in a loop. You define, you document, you execute, you record, you review, you trace, and then you repeat. Validation is not a sequence of steps. It is a controlled life cycle. Documentation is embedded across every stage to ensure traceability, reproducibility, and audit readiness. In regulated environments, this is not optional. It is fundamental because validation is not just about proving a system works. It is about proving that the system can be trusted. Now let me share my approach. My background includes working with legacy systems, COBOL, CIS Customer Information and Control System, Fortran, where documentation is often minimal or missing. In those environments, you don't rely only on what is written. You analyze behavior. You read the system through its outputs. And I apply the same thinking to machine learning systems because ML models are not rule-based. Their logic is not explicitly written. It is learned from data. So instead of asking only, does this model work? I ask, where does it fail? Under what conditions does it break? What assumptions are hidden in the data? I probe inputs. I analyze outputs. I study failure patterns. In traditional systems, you read the logic. In machine learning systems, you infer the logic. And that is where real validation happens. Not just checking results, but understanding behavior. Let me leave you with this. Validation is not about proving a system works. It is about understanding where it might fail and ensuring that failure never reaches the real world. This is Shankar from System-Based Labs. See you on the next training session. Goodbye.